What is the capital of Peru? Part 3 of 3 by Aldrich Chase. Dan and his class have been visiting the local museum, led by their teacher, Mr. Fripp. Dan has become separated from the group, and he is now trapped at a desk in a recreation of the old town school, populated by waxwork children and a sinister waxwork teacher. What terrors await him, and will he survive? Dan sat among the waxwork class and gave a heartfelt groan. How had this horror come to pass, that he'd been left alone? Then he felt weak when he heard speak a voice with booming tone. What is the capital of Peru? Dan thought that voice came from the front, but that is quite insane. This has to be a nasty stunt. The voice boomed out again, and poor Dan's nerves were not improved because the teacher's lips had moved. What is the capital of Peru? The teacher, sir, now scowled at Dan, with bulging eyes, blood red, then glided forth among the desks, where Dan sat stiff with dread. Securely pegged, Dan softly begged, ask someone else instead. Sir glided past the swotty girl, who lowered her raised hand. He stopped and loomed beside poor Dan, who wished that he could stand. Dan's saucer's gummy warped vibrate as Sir made his demand. What is the capital of Peru? Dan spoke out in an angry voice. I don't know and don't care. I am not sitting here by choice. You've trapped me in this chair. This joke has gone on far too long. I think we'll end it there. You're just some actor in a show who's paid to play his part. They like to film these jokes, I know, but I am much too smart. I've tried to play along, although I guessed it from the start. Sir sneered, then glared with scorn at Dan, through eyes that glowed like fire. The moustache hairs twitched on his lip and stood out like sharp wire. He spoke a single booming word, as though that might inspire. Hand. Dan said, it's odd what people do, and hard to understand, but it must make sense in Peru to name their city Hand. Sir single booming word cut through, repeating his command. Hand. Dan's body moved as if bewitched. He cried out in alarm. His brain, it seemed, had lost control as he held out his arm and turned his wrist so that his hand could offer up its palm. Sir slowly raised his wooden cane. Dan hoped it was a fake. The whole thing had become insane, and he began to quake. Sir swish and flick was sharp and quick, just like a striking snake. Whoosh! Whack! Dan screamed and grabbed his stinging hand, and looked down at his palm. Across it was a dark red band, which proved he'd come to harm. Sir took no notice of Dan's pain, and asked his question once again. What is the capital of Peru? Dan cried out, I have no idea. I'd use the internet. But you don't have computers here. They're not invented yet. It's rotten I've been left alone. Or I could borrow someone's phone. A sudden brainwave came to him. He knew what he must do. He said, that globe upon your desk will have on it Peru, and it will show the capital, so I can answer you. He struggled to rise from his desk, but he could not break free. He said, you'll have to let me go, or bring the globe to me. Sir spoke a single booming word, as chilling as could be. Hand. Dan thought to keep his poor hand still, to spare it further harm, but like a puppet with no will, and strings tied to his arm, he watched with horror, feeling ill, as he held out his palm. Whoosh! Whack! Dan's world was full of fear and pain, his hand a throbbing ache, and no one cared, though it was plain he was here by mistake. He heard Sir's awful voice again, and knew his heart would break. "What is the capital of Peru?" Dan felt a dark and deep despair, because he did not know, and though the question was unfair, each time he'd get a blow, and he'd be trapped forever there. They would not let him go. The world for Dan looked small and grim, and full of pain and dread, but then the girl in front of him with great care turned her head, and softly, so she went unheard, she mouthed to him a single word. Dan knew if he could read her lips, the answer would be there, but he must not make any slips, he must proceed with care. He watched her mouth the word 3 times, while trying not to stare. Once Dan thought that he knew the word, he felt a little calmer, a little flame of hope had stirred, that he'd escape this drama. He said, "In Peru, so I've heard, the capital is Lama." And whoosh! Whack! "What is the capital of Peru?" The girl's head gave a tiny shake, and that seemed to convey Dan's answer had a small mistake, but was not far away. He wondered what change he should make that might yet save the day. The girl mouthed Dan the word once more, and though his pain was great, he watched her closely as before, and strove to concentrate. At last the word was in his grasp. He said it with a pain-filled gasp. "Lima!" Sir nodded, turned, and glided back along the classroom aisle. It seemed he'd finished his attack, if only for a while. The girl who'd saved Dan further pain faced front and raised her hand again. Sir moved to stand behind his desk and raised his wicked cane, to point once more towards the globe, as if that might explain why hitting children helped them learn the facts they should retain. Once more Sir's eyes were only glass, his lips a frozen sneer. He gazed with contempt at his class, who sat there meek with fear. Except the girl whose hand was raised, she could not be too highly praised. Dan saw the globe start to rotate, and then abruptly halt. His heart surged with a joy so great, it turned a somersault, because he found to his delight the desk no longer held him tight. Dan pushed himself up from the desk and scrambled clear with glee. His instincts told him he should run, yet he chose not to flee. Instead, he stepped towards the girl who'd helped to set him free. The sight of her blank, lifeless face filled him with sad surprise. This girl who turned her head with grace, and was so smart and wise, was one more waxwork in this place, with dull and glassy eyes. "Thank you, you saved my life," Dan said, and with a move unplanned, he leaned across and moved his head towards the girl's raised hand. Then very gently with his lips he kissed the sweet girl's fingertips. The girl was still a waxwork girl, and she remained unchanged. The classroom did not spin and whirl and end up rearranged, but changes can be hard to spot, and Dan inside had changed a lot. He walked towards the teacher's desk, an act that might seem dumb, and reached out with his handkerchief, though fear made him shake some, and from the teacher's waxy chin he plucked the blob of gum. Dan gave the sweet girl one last smile, then strode towards the door. He wanted to leave there in style, though shaken to his core. Besides, in this bleak haunted school, to run might be to break a rule. Dan shut the school door behind him, and then, with flying feet, went bolting down the worn stone steps and racing through the street. He wanted to get far away from where he had been beat. Dan's class was seated on a wall, beside a water pump. Would they know he was there at all? His heart began to thump. He shouted out an anxious call, and laughed to see them jump. "Where have you been?" said Mr. Fripp. "I've kept my eye upon your movements during this school trip, yet did not know you'd gone." Dan thought, "I'll surely sound a fool if I tell them about the school." He said, "I did not sleep last night, and I was feeling beat. I must have dozed off out of sight upon some wooden seat. But please don't worry, I don't mind that I was almost left behind." "Well, let's press on," said Mr. Fripp. "Though Dan is feeling tired, the next sight might exert its grip and leave us all inspired. And Dan, please don't give me the slip. My patience has expired." Dan thought about poor Mr. Fripp, who had to keep control, but did not use a cane or whip to help achieve his goal. He felt a surge of gratitude and vowed to change his attitude.